What's up YouTube? It's Larry Lursey. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to take a look at the sky replacement feature that's one of the new things in the 2021 Adobe Photoshop update. In the last video I did a little bit of an overview of the new features in this update, and we're going to kind of narrow down into the sky replacement part of the update in this video. I'm going to show you basic image, how to drop a sky in, make some adjustments to it, and use that to enhance your images. We'll go through each of the tools in this new feature and show you how to use them to maximize the results and basically get a nice looking sky into an image that was just blank before. I think you're going to find it pretty exciting, so let's jump right in and roll the intro. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and this is the image we're going to work with. I thought this would be a good, straightforward image to add a sky to without being overly complicated, but just kind of show us the tools available to us. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos in the past, you know that typically I like to make a layer first before I go into the software that I'm using, but this one is set up specifically where you don't have to, because it's going to make us some standalone layers anyway. So that's kind of a big plus about Photoshop's Add Sky feature right off the bat. So what we're going to do to get started is come up here. It's not under Filter, as you might think. It's under Edit, Sky Replacement. And that's going to bring up this box here. Let's move this off to the side. And we're going to go through all these things one at a time and talk about what they do. So you can see Photoshop has already grabbed a sky and put it back here. So we can kind of start up here with the different skies. If we click this little down arrow, you will see we've got some sample skies here, and there's different categories. You got blue skies, as the name implies. Let's just leave that open. Spectacular, which are going to be these crazy, oh my god, you got to see the sunset type things. And then some actual sunsets, like that. And first thing you want to always do is make sure that your sky is somewhat matching the sky that was there. If you remember on this, we turn off preview, we have just kind of a light blue sky. It was just kind of a clear day type of a thing. So if we throw on some sort of a really warm, one of these dramatic sunset type skies, it's not really going to look right because the lighting on here doesn't really match this. Now that's something we could go back and fix by adjusting the color and really warming a lot of this up. So you could do that, but it's certainly going to be simpler just to go ahead and pick some of these plain blue skies that just give you a sky, give you some interest without totally going too far and making you have to do a lot of work. And so it's easy to do is just kind of go through and look at a few of these. I'm always a fan of this one because it gives you some sort of texture up here but without anything too distracting. And any of these will probably work on the blue sky ones. Let's take a look at this. I think that's pretty good. One thing you can do is come down here and click this plus button, and it'll bring up a browser where you can go through and look for your own clouds, and you can bring in clouds of your own that can be used in these images, which is really nice as well, especially if you are super organized. And what you can do here, get that to go away, is actually hit folders here, and I could make one called My Skies, like that. Then what I would do is when I bring in some of these new skies, I would put them into there. Now let me jump into Bridge really quickly to show you something important about adding skies. Okay, so here is a shot of some nice clouds that I shot out at a soccer field. And so this is one that I would use as a sky replacement at some point. But there is something that I would recommend you do before you save these into your folder. Well, two things actually. One, you want to go through and make sure you've cleaned up any dust spots. If you're someone who gets a lot of dust spots in the sky, or maybe you are and you just don't realize it, it just looks like I might see one there. I would go through first and make sure to remove all those, because otherwise every time you use it somewhere, you're going to have a problem. The other thing, and let me pull up two of these at once, what you can see here is that I've gone in and I've taken out some of these distractions. I've leveled out that one tree that's sticking up, and I've kind of cleaned up this transition along here. And the reason for this is when you drop this in behind something, a lot of times some of this will be viewable. If there's a lot of trees at the bottom, you might be able to slide your horizon line down until the tops of these trees are going. And so you don't want this. You don't want any hard white lines. You certainly don't want any soccer goals to appear up in the tree line. So by softening this line a little bit and even evening out the top a little bit, it just safeguards you. Even though most of the time this is not even going to show, I found that it's easier to go ahead and do this and then save this as your clouds that you might use. So just for grins, let's go ahead and bring in one of those clouds, and let's bring in the one we were just looking at. It's going to allow us to do it. We'll just call it sample clouds. Well, you know what, let's call it soccer clouds. Help me remember which one that was. And there we go. And you see it's here under the My Skies. And what we can do, if we hit this little button up here, it's going to allow us to move things around. If we bring it up, you can see here's what we're talking about. There's that side. And it's actually cropped it before it even got to that. But this kind of does allow, you can see, so if you ended up with a little bit of overlay like this, that wouldn't be the end of the world, as opposed to one visible tree would be a little rough. But what you don't want is you don't want, to bring it all the way down to where that doesn't look right, because the horizon line now is way down here, which doesn't make sense. So you're going to want to have that horizon line something like that. And this also brings up the issue of sometimes the image isn't quite right. And we'll talk about how to fix that as we get down. So let's start up here and work our way down. Shift Edge. I'm just going to put that like that. So Shift Edge is basically looking at the edges, the edge of this. Where is it basically masking out this mountain and letting the clouds start? By bringing the shift edge in, you can see it starts bringing it in up this way, where it's masking much more and giving you a lot more of a transition before the clouds start. If we come up this way, the opposite happens. The clouds are actually, you can see, starting to flow out over the mountains. So what you want to do, a lot of times, you definitely need to base a lot of these on the image that you're using, because they're all going to have different things they need. You can't just say, as a rule of thumb, always do -5 shift edge, because that's not always going to work. Sometimes you're going to need to do a +5 or whatever, just to give it a little bit of wrap around this line here, so that it looks a little more realistic. And it's really going to vary from image to image. But that's the beauty of this. It takes seconds to just sit here and kind of play around with it a little bit until you get what looks good. In this case, I'm just going 2 or 3 over, just to make sure it's giving us a little bit of clouds creeping over, because I think that looks appropriate. And then we've got this fading edge. We bring that all the way down. You can see the clouds go right into that transition line. Bring it all the way up, and there's a very smooth transition. So again, you just need to move it along until you go, okay, I think that looks realistic. And it will vary by image. So now we've got 2 groupings here. Sky adjustments, foreground adjustments. Pretty self-explanatory. These are only going to affect the sky. And so brightness, pretty obvious. You want this to match what your image looks like. If you shot the thing on a dark, gloomy day and you have these bright, super pillowy clouds, it may not make as much sense with the lighting in the image. Same thing here, we're going too far the other way. But this will allow you, if you've got a sky file that you think is a little too light or a little too dark, you can tweak it right here. Same thing with the temperature. This looks a little bit warmer to me here than the sky, and so I would be tempted to go ahead and warm up that sky a little bit until it looks like it matches. And these are the things that will get you in trouble, is when the temperature is off. You've got a really cool sky and a really warm scene here, or vice versa. It doesn't always match up, and that's something to always keep an eye on. Let's look here at scale. 100% right here. What we can do is make that a little bit bigger, spread things out, and then that will allow me to move things left and right. Same thing if I want to go negative for some reason, it's going to make it too small. But when you get these situations here where the edges are giving you trouble, you can just bring that up to 107, 110, something like that. It'll make it just big enough that You can move things around. Now flip here is something that is really important. It's just a little click box here at the bottom, but it's super important because when you look at an image like this, now this was shot, like I said, just pretty much overhead light, not too much direction. Yeah, as you can see, pretty much both sides of the wall have the exact same light. It was probably dead middle of the day, probably not a cloud in the sky. So terrible time to be photographing outside, but when you're there, you're there. However, if this was some sort of a sunset and there were clear shadows going this way and you could see that the sun was coming in from the right and my clouds had sun coming from the left, that would not work at all. So what you would want to do is flip here, and it basically just flips the clouds back and forth. And so now you would have the light coming from the right a little bit. Again, these clouds have a little bit of direction coming from this side. So this would work probably a little better on this image because it kind of gives the illusion that the light's coming from this side since we can really only see this side. But flip is a really important thing to keep in mind as you put a cloud in there. I think having these together, temperature and flip, are very important that when you put those clouds in, go, is the color temperature the same and is the light direction the same? Because those are some of the first things that will throw off your composite and tip off the viewer that something is wrong in the image. That goes just as much for, if not more for, when you're adding a subject in to a scene and the subject is lit from a different side or a different color. It totally throws off the believability. So always keep an eye on flip and temperature. Enough about that. Now we go to foreground. You've got two different modes here, multiply and screen. And you may know these from some of your blending modes, that multiply is going to darken things, screen is going to lighten things. Again, we're just working with the foreground. So if we were to switch to screen, we know we're lightening things here in the foreground. And what that's going to do is basically we decide how much do we want to lighten. Bring it back. How much do we want to affect the color? Just like that. Multiply is going to do the opposite. It's going to darken things. You go up here, it's going to really darken things. You bring it back, not so much. So if you're down here, really on both of these where you're not really doing much adjustment, it's not going to make a huge difference when you switch between the two, so you can't really even see anything. This is more for if you think, I think this foreground is just too dark, I want to lighten it a little bit. I don't know why they don't just call this darken and lighten. It'd be a lot easier for people. But then you can come through and play with this a little bit. You see it's mostly working up here, but gives you an idea of what that would do. Preview here, we've kind of touched on this already, but this is turning that off and on so we can see the before and after. It's giving us kind of this haze up here, which I'm not entirely crazy about, so I'm going to fix that a couple of ways by bringing this back. I'm going to switch this to darken a little bit. Multiply, see I've already fixed it for them with the terminology. I think that's a little bit better right there. So preview is going to show us before and after. And that's pretty good. Again, it's done a great job through here, which is really the hard work. What you've got to do is the thing that Photoshop can't really do yet, is look at that lighting direction, look at that color temperature, and make sure that those are good balances. Now, output is also kind of important. You will see here, you've got the option of doing new layers or duplicate layers. Duplicate layers is just going to basically flatten this thing and put it out. We want to do new layers. Hit OK, and it kicks us out here, and you can see it's made this whole group, which is so cool that we've got it all right here. We can turn it off and on if we want to. But it's broken this up into so many different things with these different adjustment layers. You can see where it's masked the sky. All these things that you can go in, turn off, turn on. You can tweak them more. If you see something more that needs to be masked, you can come in here and adjust these masks. You can play with the sky temperature if you decide you've done too much or not enough. So this is fantastic that it puts it all in this group for you. Now, one problem that can come up that we didn't address here in the foreground is we've got a very easy one because there's no water. If there was a big lake here in front and we had the reflection of the clouds in that water, that would make things a lot more complicated because we can't put in this sky up here and then have no clouds in the reflection in the water. That's another telltale sign that a sky has been dropped in. However, I did recently come across a video a guy did, which I thought was very cool, And rather than steal his idea, I'll just give you a link here at the end of this video where you can go check it out for yourself, because it's a very creative way that he has come up with for fixing reflections in water. But that's going to be a little more advanced. This is just kind of showing you the default tools that we have with this new feature, and I think it's pretty powerful. Now, I'm guessing Photoshop's probably going to add to it at some point. Maybe they'll even automate the reflection in the water process for us. But as you can see, the basic tools are there and pretty powerful. How they compare to like a Luminar sky replacement, hard to say. I think both of them have different strengths and weaknesses, but I do love how this one gives us this group of everything broken down with a lot of flexibility afterwards. So there you have it. It's not too difficult to use. Photoshop has really simplified things, and the ability to use your own clouds, I think, is a nice touch as well. Now, one thing that we did touch on in the video was having water in front, with like a lake in front of mountains, and having to have that reflection down into the water. I'm going to give you a link here in a second of how to get to that video. This guy does a really great trick on how to use the software to add that reflection into the water. So that's definitely something you'll want to check out. If you haven't already done so, I hope you'll take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you know as we have more of these Photoshop updates coming out. And I think you're going to find them very interesting. Here's a link to the video I was telling you about on how to throw that sky reflection down into the water. Really is a cool technique. I think you'll like it. But until next week, I will see you. Take care. Bye-bye.